Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. Today we're on with Jesse, and I'm really excited to have Jesse on with us because Jesse is one of our Canadian clients who actually goes to school in Toronto. And, we haven't had too many of these interviews with our Canadian clients today. We've had a few, I think. So I want to get him on here today to talk to you guys about his recruiting experience. And I know we have probably some Canadian followers out there. A lot of times I get questions from Canadian students saying, oh, like, seems like you guys primarily work with US students. Does this work for Canadian students? And so I think it's just good for you guys to like actually hear from someone who's actually from Canada. And so anyway, without further ado, Jesse, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Yep. Thanks, Sam.
And I guess before we start and dive into everything, if you don't mind just introducing yourself real quick so that people have a sense for who you are.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Jesse, and like Sam said, I'm with a few Canadian students, right? I went to Rotman Commerce, U of T, and basically actually got into investment banking quite late in a way, since I actually started quitting a bit later. And because of that, I just really focused on doing what I could. Some at the start was a bit more rough, but using Wall Street Mastermind, I was really able to fix some mistakes. And then overall, I'm really happy to finally get an offer from BMO Capital Markets for the upcoming 2022 summer.
Got it. Okay. Awesome, man. So I guess you are now a junior, right? You just started your junior year, right? We're in September. And you only joined Wall Street Mastermind, I think like 3 months ago, right? If I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. Or actually, yeah, you joined in June, right? Or so I guess maybe it's been 4 months. It was early June. But regardless, you joined during the summer between your sophomore and junior year, right?
Mm.
Before that, like, when did you realize you wanted to do investment banking? Like, was it first year in college, second year in college? Like, at what point did you did the switch go off and you say, oh, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess my first year, I didn't really pay too much attention, honestly. I did kind of slacked off a bit. But when I really got to networking more, I realized that investment banking and the whole banking world is where I actually want to be at. So I guess at the start of my second year, that's really when I got interested in investment banking. So I kind of tried to recruit for that process, but on my own.
Okay, so starting at the beginning of second year of college, so you started being more serious about it. And then what did you do throughout your entire second year then? Like, what were some of the things that you were doing on your own? How are things going for you? Like, can you just kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So back then, I wasn't really in any clubs per se. So I really just prepped on my own. There's so many resources out there. I just tried to cram as much as I could. At the end of the day, I did actually get some interviews at RBC National Bank and some other boutiques, but I just wasn't good enough, right? Like for all his guides, while they were helpful, I wasn't the best candidate on a day of. So that's when I really realized that something wasn't clicking. But I still actually try to keep on recruiting for next summer since junior, like I guess like sophomore role is kind of hard to get, right? For investment banking. So actually I recruited my junior summer then afterwards that. So I kept on doing so. I really tried to fix my mistakes, but it didn't work at the end. So this is when I actually contacted Wall Street Mastermind and I made a really big change to do a gap year, right? So kind of recruit for my junior summer, if that makes sense. So that's pretty much my plan going forward. And that's when I reached out to Wall Street Mastermind.
Got it. Okay, so you tried to recruit for sophomore summer on your own, and then that didn't work out. Then you also recruited for junior summer on your own, and that also didn't work out. And then at this point, you kind of figure, shoot, like I'm almost out of options, and you're gonna give it one last try, even by like delaying graduation. But this time, you want to make sure that since it's your last try, that you're really doing everything you can to make sure that you get the outcome that you want.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. So then you join Wall Street Mastermind in June. I mean, did you like, were you worried that we hadn't worked with that many Canadian students? I mean, we have worked with Canadian students, but obviously most of our students come from the US because one, we're based in the US, and two, the US is a much bigger market and there's a lot more jobs here and a lot more students who want to go into it. So it's just like basic statistics. But like I know a lot of Canadian students kind of have that concern because people want to feel like, oh, I don't want to be the first person to try something. But did you have similar thoughts, or like what were you thinking when you first decided to join?
I mean, at the start, I had a few concerns, honestly, right? Like, I wasn't sure it was the best program. But the thing is, all the guides that we use are just based off of like the American guides, right? So in theory, they're pretty much the exact same content, right? So it's transferable in a way. There are some differences which I've realized later down the road, but most of it, 90%, exactly the same, and it was the right choice.
Yeah, got it. That's a really good point, which is all the guides and all the financial modeling courses and all the resources that most people are using are pretty much from the US anyway. Right? I mean, what I always tell people is like, look, investment banking is investment banking. Like it's doesn't really change. Like what bankers do don't really change that much just because you go from the United States to Canada or the United States to the UK, right? It's like you're helping companies raise money and you're helping companies acquire other companies. Like the the job itself is the same. And so naturally the things that they're looking for in terms of who would be a good candidate versus not, it's pretty much the same as well. And doesn't really matter what country you go to school in. Right? There are also a lot of Canadian students I know that try to work in the U.S. Right, and obviously there's a bit more of a hurdle there with the sponsorship and whatnot, but it does happen, and so that just goes to show you that it's the same job no matter where you are. Right.
Yeah.
What's interesting though is you mentioned like, hey, there are some like small differences, maybe certain more nuanced things. Like, what would be like one or two examples of some of these nuances that you're talking about?
Yeah. So to start off, as you know, the entire composition is different. Canada is very oil and mining heavy.
Yep.
So when I do go to the interviews, it's very technical. I was asked so many questions. I actually got them correct. But at the end, they hired an engineering student instead, right? So I guess one thing to really understand is that for some roles, you're at a disadvantage in a way, is they really prefer someone of oil background, right? To understand that, so maybe some better networking and whatnot. But that's one of the biggest differences I've seen. And the second one's honestly, there's a lot of brain teasers. I don't know why personally, but basically half my interviews, I was given a random brain teaser from probability to some kind of quick valuation on a spot, but happens pretty often. I think you just really have to understand because at the end of the day, I think Canada's far more academic. They value high GPA a lot more in a sense, right? I know for some firms, if your GPA is high enough, you're almost guaranteed the interview regardless. So something to really keep in mind that Canada's more academic heavy to a certain extent.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, brain teasers, they used to ask those a bit more in the US back in the days, but I feel like over time it's kind of gotten phased out for the most part here. Not completely, it can still come up once in a while. But yeah, I mean personally I hate brain teasers. It's like I don't really know what is supposed to show them, you know?
Yeah.
But but at the end of the day, though, brain teasers is just like it's less about getting the right answer. It's more about showing them how you actually think. And a lot of brain teasers actually like if you've looked it up before ahead of time, sometimes you actually get a brain teaser you already know. In which case, that's why I think it's like kind of silly. It's like, how do you know if the person is um, actually like thinking on their feet or if they've just studied ahead of time, which doesn't really tell you anything, right? Um, but regardless, that's really good to know for people. But aside from that, though, so obviously slightly different industry focus. Oil and gas is a huge sector in Canada. I mean, the U.S. have oil and gas banking too. It's mostly in Houston, but as a country, oil and gas is a much bigger industry or a much more important industry in Canada. So that makes sense, and they favor engineers. And I've heard similar things for Houston openings as well. And then like just on the brain teaser part, making sure you study that. But aside from that, I mean, the rest of the behavioral questions, technical questions, kind of all the same, right? Like
Yeah.
still need to network with bankers, right? That doesn't really
Mm-hmm.
change much. You mentioned having a good GPA. Obviously, that's true in the U.S. as well. And so, sounds like like you said, for the most part, probably 90% plus of the requirements are all the same. Okay, got it. That makes sense. So you come into Wall Street Mastermind. You like what? I don't know what your expectations were, but like, what did you end up actually doing in Wall Street Mastermind, and how was that relative to what you expected coming in? And like, what did you find to be the most helpful about this process versus whatever it is that you were doing prior to Wall Street Mastermind, like on your own? Because like a very common question that everyone always has is like, what's the difference? Like, why can't I just do this on my own? Right? So like what would you say to people who are kind of on the outside looking in and it's kind of hard for them to envision what this really is like? Like, can you kind of describe your experience a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess Wall Street Mastermind really makes you understand what banking is and what you have to know to actually get into banking, right? I know that a lot of the time people just don't really understand what the whole investment banking field is. They're not sure what it takes to really get in, right? So when I signed up for Wall Street Mastermind, I just know that I need to really work hard to make sure I actually understand everything. Since once you really know the material, know how to actually approach it, you know what to do. That stuff isn't really taught by anyone. It's only taught by people if you know someone in the industry, right? So that's the really big takeaway. So I guess when I did Wall Street Mastermind, right, I just really understood that I wasn't networking properly in a way. I could have done that better, right? At the same time, technicals and whatnot, the guides, well, auto guides and stuff, they do teach you somewhat. The moment you get a question that's different, you're just left stumbled, right? So for Wall Street Master, I was really able to link the technicals up. I was able to get that part down. And then mostly Wall Street Mastermind also really offers like, mock interviews, right? And that's really helpful. I think that's the most important thing that I really took away from this program. Since like the staff is great, it always give great feedback. And I was really able to understand what my mistakes truly were. Since a lot of the time I found answers were correct, I did get the right behavioral answer per se, but I just wasn't the best answer, right? And I really was able to fix that. And that was another really big takeaway from this program.
Hmm. Interesting. So I want to kind of like dig in a little bit more on some of the things that you talked about. So for example, you realize you weren't networking properly before and you learned how to do it better, right? Now we don't
Mm-hmm.
have to give away, all of the secrets, but like what would be one example of something that maybe you weren't doing before when you were networking that after you came to Wall Street Management, you like, tweak this one thing or change one thing and then you saw better result because of it. Like, is there anything you can point to like that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the questions you ask during a call is really important, right? Some questions are good, some are just bad. And these bad questions, if you ask them, you already know you're not gonna, really follow up with them, not gonna respond to you, right? I
Right.
think back then I just thought as a student I could really ask whatever I really wanted to, but that just wasn't the case. You really be strategic. Everyone knows what you're down at the end of the day, right? So just really have to make sure that you really listen yourself the best. They actually want to talk to you, right? So
Right.
that's something that I really had to fix right away. And then after that, I had much better networking chats with associates and MDs.
Mhm. And you found that you got referrals more easily coming out of those conversations versus before what it probably felt like, which a lot of people have probably experienced this before, is you're going through the motions and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is you know you're supposed to network, so you have all these conversations, but they don't really lead to anything. And you also have no idea like why they're not leading to anything. And you're just like, all right, I guess I just got to do more of it. Doing more of the same things doesn't really lead to different results, right? Is that kind of how
Yeah.
it is? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, asking good questions sounds really simple, but it's not simple if you've never done it before or if no one's told you like what you should ask and what you shouldn't ask, right? And also, like every conversation is different, so it's not like people can hand you a script and say, here's a list of 10 questions. Just always ask these 10 questions to every single person you talk to, and you'll be great. Like that doesn't work. Right? Even that's how a lot of people approach it, right? Like if we're being honest, like you might have done this too before Wall Street National was you have a set list of questions
Mm-hmm.
you always ask, and then you ask the same question no matter who you're talking to. It's just kind of robotic, right?
Yeah.
I was talking about like when you do that, it feels more like an interrogation, not a conversation. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really important thing to fix for sure. On the technicals side, you mentioned like, hey, the guides, they teach you some of the stuff, but the moment you get a different question, then you kind of stumble, right? But why wouldn't that also be the case if you learn these technicals through Wall Street National? Because aren't you learning the same things? Or like what are you saying that like with what you learned in Wall Street Mastermind, it got to the point where it didn't matter what they were asking you and you'd just be able to adapt on the fly and answer whatever questions they're throwing at you? Or like and if that's what you're saying, like what created that difference in terms of results? Because that I think is what most people don't really understand, right?
Mm-hmm. So I guess in Wall Street Mastermind, you really start from the basics, right? Like you really break things down to the core fundamentals. So if you add like a twist, you know what's happening, right? Some of these like accounting technicals, they are always straightforward. And then if a different account never heard of before, if you know what's under, you know what the relationship should be, so you know how to interact. That's one of the biggest takeaways from technical questions. In terms of the valuation and other questions, they're pretty much, always quite similar in a sense. But Wall Street Management tells you how to really answer them properly. Like everyone can tell what enterprise value is, but is that really the best answer, right? Since when it comes down to the wire, how you answer that question really could change if you get the offer or not.
Got it. So it sounds like it's two things. One is we're not teaching you how to answer specific questions. We're actually teaching you the underlying concepts so that once you understand the concepts, they can ask whatever questions they want about those concepts and it doesn't really matter. Right? That's what's fundamentally different about how most people learn, which is most people have a list of like 400 questions or whatever, and they just try to like memorize the answers to those questions. But you can't guarantee that every single question you get asked in an interview is going to be one of those questions that you memorize, right? So that's why that doesn't work. And then the second thing you're saying is like, aside from just knowing the answers to these questions, which is one thing, a lot of people know it. The second part is like, how do you deliver those answers? Like it's in the delivery. It's how you communicate those answers. If you can be more concise, more to the point, have smoother delivery, two different people can explain the same concept in two different ways, and one will sound a lot better than the other. And that's kind of how you win out against the competition. So is that kind of what you're saying?
Yep.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. And the last thing you mentioned is like mock interviews, right? Which is like that was really helpful for you and just being able to really understand what your mistakes were. Had you done mock interviews prior to Wall Street National, like just maybe with, I don't know, upperclassmen or other friends or even bankers, like, or were the mock interviews that you did with us the kind of the first ones you've ever done?
I did mock interviews before with my friends and upperclassmates before, definitely, right? It's just since mocking someone like a year above you is different from mocking someone who's acting in the industry, right? It's a big disconnect there, and I actually got a lot of quality feedback that my peers didn't like give me back then, right? For certain questions, just different ways. I know back then, most behavioral questions, I was just fine, right? Like, think about yourself. Well, what is the right answer? But with here in Wall Street Mastermind, even in these behavioral questions, I was told how to answer them better. So I really understood what I was talking about, right? Since I guess, and another mistake that I made was that I made a lot of assumptions that I really understood what was happening. I skipped a lot in my stories, and that just wasn't clear enough, right? So it kind of broke things down. And I guess one more thing to kind of add on to that is that I tend at the past just to slur my words a bit. Through these mock interviews, I really learned how to enunciate my words better so the interviewer could actually understand what I was trying to say.
Yeah, yeah, that's really important. I think so. The first point you're making is it sounds like the level of feedback that you're getting is different when you're just mocking with your friends who are maybe a year above you or whatever, versus someone who actually has a lot of experience, who's worked in the industry and who has actually interviewed a lot of candidates. Probably the exact same answer that you gave in your previous mocks and in the mock with us, maybe your friend would have told you like, oh yeah, this is pretty good, like no real feedback. Whereas our coaches might have told you like, actually you could do this better and this better and this better and this better, and you're like, oh wow, my answer could be so much better, and that makes a huge difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the first thing, and then the second thing is, like you said, the delivery. A lot of times with the mock interviews, when we do mock interviews, we're not even focused on just testing you on the concepts anymore or on the content, because to be honest, prior to the mock interviews, like we've already reviewed the content of your behavioral answers, and we know you've already gone through our technical trainings. And so if you've been doing the work, we know you most likely know what the right answer is or what you want to say at least, right? So it's not even about that. There's a level beyond that, which is like, okay, we nailed the content, but now like we got to nail the delivery, right? It's not even just what you say, but more importantly, it's how you say it, right? And so you can't really get feedback on the delivery or like things like, hey, you gotta enunciate better or whatever, um, unless you do these mocks in person, right? And
Yeah.
so I used to have a problem with my delivery too when I was interviewing in college. Like I don't know, I still might be. I feel like I've gotten a lot better at it, but like at least before in college, I was very much a very monotone guy, like just the way I talked. It was like just there's no energy to my voice whatsoever, and it just felt like I didn't care about anything. Right? It's like too cool for school,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just not how you want to be in an interview. But also, problem was I didn't realize that I had the problem. Like I thought, like that's just how I talk. So you don't really think about how you talk, right? Because like how you talk is how you talk. To you, it sounds normal until someone actually points it out to you and is like, hey, like you have this issue and you need to fix it, or else it's not going to go well with your interviewers. And you're like, oh, okay. And like the first step to improving anything is self-awareness, right? And once you have the self-awareness, then sure you can go and work on whatever it is that you need to work on. Right? So I think like that feedback loop is super important. Right? Would you
Yep.
agree?
Yep. Definitely. That's really important for me as well. So yeah.
Got it. So, um, I guess like as you mentioned, you ended up getting the offer from BMO. My understanding is in Canada, especially if you want to work for like a top five bank, there's just not a lot of jobs. Is that right? Like especially relative to the US, at least, like it's a much smaller industry. Like, do you have a sense for like how big the internship class is for these big five banks?
I think for like last summer, right, for BMO itself, if you add up like all the people in the capital markets, so all the investment bankers, the corporate bankers, sales and trading people, it's like 50 in total. And that's not a huge amount. Think about it. So many schools out there in Canada, so many students actually want to get into capital markets investment banking. So there's a much smaller class size. So definitely I agree with you. It's just much smaller teams. That's why it feels hard to get in to a certain extent.
Yeah, yeah. And would you say there's a pretty big drop off after the, big five, like the top five banks, like after that, you know, what comes after that? I don't even know. It's like the rest are basically considered middle market, I suppose. Like the top five banks should consider bulge bracket for you guys, or is that how you would think about it?
I would say the top five banks are the most target banks per se. Of course, there's other global banks that also are in Canada. They're just much harder to get in. Oftentimes, you have to get through one of these big five Canadian banks first before you want to break into these bracket global banks, right? I guess after those first five, like BMO, TD, Scotia, like whatever, afterwards is National Bank, which is somewhat okay. But after that, it's just very boutiques across Canada, like really small mid market. And then those kind of boutiques, right? So I guess after that, just a huge mess in a way. It's really hard to navigate the whole like capital markets like landscape then.
Yeah, got it. Okay. I mean, that's great that it sounds like there's a pretty big drop off after the top 5 or 6 banks, depending on if you include National Bank. But so that's great that you were able to get one of the very few spots that are available for BMO. I guess for our other students who are listening to this right now, maybe they go to school in Canada. They also have similar aspirations of working for one of these top 5 banks. Like, do you have any advice for them? Like maybe it's a piece of advice that someone else gave you while you were recruiting that just ended up helping you tremendously, in whatever way, shape, or form. Like, do you have something like that that you want to share with other people?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just really having good mentors in your life, like the people who actually know what's happening, right? In my case, I was pretty lost at the start. I didn't really find a proper mentor to Wall Street management. But till then, I was quite a mess. Even took a gap year to really find out what I really wanted to do. And that really, delayed my graduation. But if you kind of hop right into, your undergrad or like freshman year, you really just try to look for good mentors, people who really understand where you want to be and you're willing to help you. That'd be great since I think there's a huge disconnect between what's actually online and what's actually in the industry, right? You can't always Google your answers. You have to really know people in the industry to get the answers that actually benefit you. Half the time stuff on the internet is actually not even true. I don't know who said that. So I just really have to just talk to people, talk to mentors, really get the right steps for my, personal growth and direction.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point because a lot of people they'll say things like, "Oh, everything you need is already online. Like you can just Google everything, right? Like no one should need more than that to get this job." And that's just so far from the truth. Like I've never heard any successful person think that way. Right? Like every successful person that I've ever known in life has had mentors along the way that helped them get to where they are. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and I think going back to what you said, which is like, a lot of things that you read online aren't even true and you don't know where it comes from. Um, yeah, I know where it comes from. It's just that nowadays anyone can say anything they want online. And also people can say these things anonymously. Like they don't have to, like if you go on, a lot of people get their advice from Wall Street Oasis, for example. I'm not saying there's
Mm-hmm.
no good advice on Wall Street Oasis. There's some good advice on Wall Street Oasis, but there's also a lot of bad advice that's completely off base on Wall Street Oasis because nobody knows who's saying what. Like everyone's just sitting behind their screen name, or a lot of times the posts are anonymous. And there's no way for you to verify. Like, does this person actually know what they're talking about? Like,
Yep.
is this a managing director at Goldman Sachs, or is this like just another freshman in college who wants to act like a know-it-all? And it's just like
Mm-hmm.
you need to know the source of the information that you're consuming, because if it's a bad source, like it could lead you totally down the wrong path, and the person who's going to pay the price is you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yep.
so I agree. And I think the other difference between online and having an actual mentor is that a lot of the advice online tends to be more generic, right? Because it's catering to the masses. It's just like, hey, at a high level, here's what you guys need to know. But when it comes to recruiting, like when it comes to like the actual execution of things, like for example, what do you want to say for your interview answers? How do you want to tell your story, right? Like, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and how do you want to position yourself as a candidate in networking? Like, all of those things will change depending on who you are, right? And like,
Mm-hmm.
what is your profile and which candidate are we talking about? And you can't just take this one size fits all generic advice and say, here, everybody do this, or here, everybody say this, and then you guys will all get jobs. It's like there needs to be some personalization involved.
Yep.
That requires like the human touch, basically, right? Um, and so I think that's really, really good advice that you're giving people, and just food for thought, because a lot of people don't really think about that, right? So I guess guys, like if you're listening to this and maybe you go to school in Canada, maybe that there aren't a whole lot of jobs out there, and it's super competitive, and maybe you're looking for help with the process because just like Jesse, like, he understood that you only have so many opportunities. You only have so many cracks at this before kind of recruiting talent passes, right? So like if you are ready to just like put your best foot forward, if you understand the value of having a mentor to guide you along the way, then I want to invite you to reach out to us, right? And actually, before you even reach out to our team, I want to invite you to reach out and schedule a free virtual coffee chat with one of our alumni. Okay, so we have like other alumni in Wall Street Mastermind who have already successfully gone through the recruiting process, and they're setting aside time to talk to students like you because they had a really good experience and they want more people to know about what it's like to be in Wall Street Mastermind. But they can answer whatever questions you have about recruiting in general, since they were just in your shoes not too long ago. They can also answer questions you have about Wall Street Mastermind if you have any. And then after you talk to these upperclassmen, these alumni, if you're still interested in learning more about us, then they're happy to set you up for a conversation with our team. And if not, then that's totally okay too. Like at a minimum, you walk away with some valuable advice and you didn't lose anything, right? So either way, I think it's a win-win for you. If that's something that you guys are interested in, you can book this free virtual coffee chat by going to www.wallstreetmastermind.com. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you, okay, and hopefully helping you out. So with that said, Jesse, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I want to congratulate you again on an amazing offer at BMO, and also give you major props for not giving up along the way because, like you said, you didn't get it on the first try, you didn't get it on the second try, but you just third time's a charm, right? And I think a lot of people in your position probably would have just thrown in the towel or said, hey, you know what? I tried. Guess this is not for me. And they would have gone out and done something else. But you didn't take no for an answer. And instead, you went out and found a way to get it done. And so I think that's why you deserve all the success that you have. Right. So huge congrats to you. Can't wait to see what
Thanks,
else
Sam.
you accomplish. Yeah. And, it was really fun working with you. And, you're always part of the Wall Street Mastermind family. So definitely don't be a stranger if you need help with anything in the future.
Yep, definitely. We'll definitely do that. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, that'll be it for today. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this interview that we did for you guys, and we'll be back with more of these in the near future. So, we'll talk to you guys soon. All right.